My name is Hannah, and this is the story of how my life took an unexpected turn after I married the love of my life, Michael. We met during our college years and fell deeply in love. Michael was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner, kind, supportive, and with a wicked sense of humor that never failed to make me laugh. My first meeting with Michael's parents, Robert and Helen, was cordial enough. Robert, a tall man with graying hair and kind eyes, greeted me with a warm handshake. Helen, on the other hand, was more reserved. She offered a tight-lipped smile and a quick nod, her eyes scrutinizing me from head to toe. "So, you're the girl who's stolen our Michael's heart," Helen said, her tone carrying a hint of something I couldn't quite place at the time. "I hope you know how lucky you are." "I do," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Michael's an incredible person." "Yes, he is," Helen agreed, her eyes never leaving mine. "I raised him to be that way." As the evening progressed, I found myself gravitating towards Robert. He was easier to talk to, asking me about my job as a speech therapist and showing genuine interest in my responses. Helen, meanwhile, seemed more interested in regaling us with stories of Michael's childhood achievements and his sister Olivia's budding modeling career. "Olivia's doing so well in Milan," Helen boasted. "She's dating an Italian entrepreneur now." "Such a catch." I nodded politely, unsure of how to respond. Michael squeezed my hand under the table, a silent show of support that I appreciated more than he knew. The first few months of our marriage were blissful. Michael and I settled into our new home, a cozy apartment in the heart of the city. We spent our weekends exploring local cafes, going on hikes, and simply enjoying each other's company. I threw myself into my work at the speech therapy clinic, finding immense satisfaction in helping children overcome their communication challenges. But as time went on, the cracks in my relationship with Helen began to show. It started with unannounced visits to our apartment. She'd show up at odd hours, always with some flimsy excuse. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Helen showed up unannounced yet again. I was in the middle of cleaning our apartment, my hair tied back in a messy bun and wearing old clothes. "Oh my," Helen exclaimed, her eyes widening in mock surprise. I didn't realize we were going for the shabby chic look these days. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that she was still Michael's mother. "I'm just doing some cleaning, Helen." "What brings you by?" She ignored my question, pushing past me into the living room. "Cleaning? Well, you could have fooled me. Look at this dust." She ran a perfectly manicured finger along our bookshelf, holding it up for inspection. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment as our neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, walked by our open door. Helen's voice carried, ensuring that every word was audible in the hallway. "Really, Hannah," Helen continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "I don't know how Michael puts up with this. When I was a young wife, I kept our home spotless. But then again, I didn't have the luxury of gallivanting off to work every day." "My job is not a luxury, Helen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's a career I'm passionate about." Helen scoffed. "Passion doesn't keep a home, dear. Speaking of which, where is Michael? Working late again? Or perhaps, elsewhere?" The implication in her tone was clear, and it took every ounce of self-control not to lash out at her. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, "Michael is at the gym. He'll be home soon." Helen mused, a sly smile playing on her lips. "Well, I suppose we'll see." I nodded politely, biting back the retort that threatened to escape my lips. Just then, Michael walked in, his gym bag slung over his shoulder. "Mom," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "What are you doing here?" "Just checking in on you too," Helen replied sweetly. "Someone has to make sure you're being taken care of properly." Michael's eyes darted between Helen and me, sensing the tension. "Hannah takes great care of me, Mom. And I take care of her. We're a team." Helen's smile tightened. "Of course, dear. Well, I should be going. Don't forget about dinner next week." As soon as the door closed behind her, I collapsed onto the couch, tears of frustration welling up in my eyes. I'm so sorry, Hannah, Michael said, sitting beside me and pulling me into his arms. I'll talk to her again. This has to stop. Little did I know that our lives were about to change in ways we couldn't have imagined. A few weeks later, I missed my period. At first, I dismissed it as stress, but as the days went by, I couldn't ignore the possibility any longer. With shaking hands, I took a pregnancy test. Those 2 minutes felt like an eternity, but when I finally looked at the stick, there it was, 2 pink lines. I was pregnant. When I told Michael about the pregnancy, his face lit up with pure joy. He swept me into his arms, spinning me around our living room. We're going to be parents, he exclaimed, his eyes shining with happy tears. I can't believe it, Hannah. This is amazing. However, the blissful bubble burst when we realized we had to share the news with Michael's parents. I hoped, perhaps naively, that the prospect of a grandchild might soften Helen's attitude towards me. We decided to tell them over dinner at their house. As we sat around the dining table, Michael cleared his throat and squeezed my hand under the table. Mom, Dad, he began, his voice filled with excitement. We have some wonderful news. Hannah's pregnant. Robert's face broke into a wide grin. That's fantastic, he exclaimed, reaching across the table to pat Michael's shoulder. Congratulations, both of you. Helen, on the other hand, remained eerily silent. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. Well, she finally said, her voice devoid of any warmth, I suppose congratulations are in order. I do hope you're prepared for the responsibility, Hannah. Children are a full-time job, you know. The tension in the room was palpable. Robert, sensing the growing discomfort, tried to steer the conversation to safer waters, asking about our plans for the nursery and if we had thought about names yet. As the weeks passed, my body began to change. Morning sickness hit me hard, and there were days when I could barely drag myself out of bed. Despite feeling awful, I pushed myself to keep up with my work and household chores, determined not to give Helen any ammunition. One particularly rough evening, Helen showed up unannounced at our apartment. I had just returned from work and was exhausted, my feet swollen and my back aching. Oh my, Helen said as she walked in, her eyes roving over my disheveled appearance. You look absolutely dreadful, Hannah. Are you sure you're taking proper care of yourself? And the house, well, it's seen better days, hasn't it? I bit my lip, fighting back tears of frustration. I'm doing my best, Helen. Pregnancy isn't easy. She waved her hand dismissively. Nonsense. Women have been having babies for millennia. There's no need to make such a fuss about it. When I was pregnant with Michael, I never let it interfere with my duties. As she continued to criticize everything from the state of our laundry to the contents of our fridge, I felt something inside me snap. Helen, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed emotion. I appreciate your concern, but I'm tired, I'm nauseous, and quite frankly, I don't need this right now. If you can't be supportive, I think it's best if you leave. Helen's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed dangerously. Well, I never, she huffed. Is this how you speak to your elders? To family? Michael will be hearing about this, mark my words. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, our lives took another unexpected turn. One rainy afternoon, the doorbell rang insistently. I opened it to find Olivia, Michael's sister, standing there with puffy eyes and a suitcase at her feet. Olivia? I gasped. What's wrong? She burst into tears and fell into my arms. It's Marco, she sobbed. I had to leave him. He was cruel to me. I barely escaped with my life. I ushered her inside, my mind reeling. Olivia had always seemed to have the perfect life, a successful modeling career, a wealthy husband, a glamorous existence in Italy. But as she poured out her story, a very different picture emerged. He used me, Olivia choked out. He never helped with anything, never gave me money. And now? She placed a hand on her stomach, and I realized with a start that she was pregnant. Helen arrived shortly after, having been called by Olivia. She swept in like a hurricane, all concern for her daughter and venom for the absent Marco. "Don't worry, darling," she cooed to Olivia. "We'll take care of everything." A few weeks later, I gave birth to our beautiful daughter, Emma. Helen barely acknowledged Emma's arrival, her attention entirely focused on Olivia, who gave birth to a son, Luca, just 2 weeks after me. Helen was ecstatic about her grandson, lavishing him with attention and gifts, while barely sparing a glance for Emma. As the months passed, a clear pattern emerged in our household. Olivia, encouraged by Helen, became increasingly self-indulgent. She spent her days at beauty salons, getting massages and treatments, obsessing over regaining her pre-pregnancy figure. She made no effort to find a job, instead living off her parents' generosity. Before we knew it, it was time for the children to start school. Emma and Luca ended up in the same class, a situation that only highlighted Helen's blatant favoritism. She would pick up Luca from school, often leaving Emma behind for me to collect after work. At school events, Helen made it clear she was there only for Luca, barely acknowledging Emma's presence. One day, Helen fell ill. Olivia, unwilling to disrupt her beauty routine, turned to me. "Hannah," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument, "you'll need to pick up Luca, make his lunch, help with his homework, and get him ready for his school play. Mom can't do it, and I have appointments." I was taken aback by her presumption, but found myself agreeing. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to punish Luca for his mother and grandmother's behavior. He was a sweet boy, after all, and not to blame for the adults' actions. When Helen recovered, I thought things would return to their usual pattern. Instead, she approached me with an outrageous demand. "Hannah," she began, her tone sickly sweet, "now that you've seen how much work it is to care for Luca, I'm sure you understand why Olivia needs help. We think it's only fair that you contribute to his school fees. And you'd be helping out a single mother." I was stunned into momentary silence, then felt a surge of anger. "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "Helen, I have my own child to support. If Olivia needs help, she should consider getting a job." Fuming, Helen stormed off to complain to Michael. To my immense relief, he backed me up completely. He put her in her place and making it clear that her demands were unacceptable. The day of the school's drawing contest arrived. Emma had been working tirelessly on her artwork for weeks, pouring her heart and soul into each piece. Her excitement was palpable as she carefully packed her drawings into her school bag the night before. That morning, as we were getting ready to leave, Helen unexpectedly showed up at our door. "I thought I'd take the children to school today," she announced, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes plastered on her face. "Really, Grandma? You'll take me?" Emma asked, her eyes shining with hope. I received a call from Emma's teacher just before lunch. "Mrs. Johnson? There's been an incident with Emma's artwork for the contest. I think you should come to the school." My heart racing, I rushed to the school. I found Emma in her classroom, tears streaming down her face, surrounded by her ruined artwork. Each carefully crafted drawing was soaked through with what appeared to be orange juice, the colors running together in a heartbreaking mess. "Mommy," Emma sobbed as she saw me. "Grandma did it. She put juice in my bag on purpose." I felt as if I'd been punched in the gut. Leaving Emma in the care of her sympathetic teacher, I drove straight to Helen and Robert's house, my hands shaking with anger as I gripped the steering wheel. I burst into their living room, where I found Helen calmly sipping tea. "How could you?" I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. "Emma's artwork. The juice. She told me what you did." Helen's face hardened. "I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about. Children have such vivid imaginations, don't they?" Just then, Luca piped up from the corner of the room where he'd been playing quietly. "But Grandma, I saw you put the juice in Emma's bag. You said it was a surprise for her." The room fell silent. Robert, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward, his face a mask of shock and disappointment. "Helen, is this true?" Caught out, Helen's demeanor changed instantly. Her eyes flashed with defiance. So what if I did? It's not fair that Emma gets to participate in the contest when Luca didn't enter. I was just evening the playing field. Robert exploded. Have you lost your mind, Helen? How could you do such a thing to our granddaughter? As Robert continued to berate Helen, Olivia burst into the room. Taking in the scene, she immediately rushed to Helen's side. How dare you all gang up on Mom like this, she shrieked. Get out, Hannah. You're not welcome here. Stunned by this turn of events, I left the house in a daze. I drove home in silence, my mind reeling from what had transpired. When Michael came home that evening, I recounted the day's events. His face paled, then flushed with anger as I told him what his mother had done. That's it, he said, his voice hard with resolve. We're done. No more contact with Mom or Olivia. I won't have them hurting you or Emma anymore. A few months after the art contest incident, Emma came home buzzing with excitement about an upcoming weekend school trip. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself looking forward to this opportunity for her to create happy memories with her classmates. However, my joy was short-lived when I learned that Olivia was in charge of collecting payments for the trip. I made the payment promptly, making sure to get a receipt and even taking a screenshot of the bank transfer, just in case. The morning of the trip arrived, and Emma was up at dawn, her small suitcase packed and ready by the door. We arrived at school early, Emma practically bouncing with anticipation. But as we approached the bus, I saw Olivia standing there with a clipboard, and my heart sank. Name? Olivia asked coldly as we reached her. Emma Johnson, I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. Olivia made a show of scanning her list. I'm sorry, she said, not sounding sorry at all. But I don't have any record of payment for Emma. She can't go on the trip. Emma's face fell, and I felt a surge of anger. That's impossible, I insisted. I paid weeks ago. I have the receipt and bank transfer to prove it. Olivia shrugged. I don't know what to tell you, Hannah. If it's not on my list, it's not paid. Emma started to cry, and I felt helpless. The teacher, Mrs. Anderson, approached us, concern etched on her face. What seems to be the problem? She asked. I explained the situation, and Mrs. Anderson looked troubled. I'm so sorry, but if the payment isn't recorded, I can't let Emma on the bus. It's school policy. She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, if you'd like, Emma could still come along. I'd be happy to cover her expenses privately. While I appreciated Mrs. Anderson's kindness, I couldn't accept. This wasn't about money, it was about principle. I thanked her but declined, then stepped away to call Michael. When I explained what was happening, Michael was furious. Don't worry, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. I'm on my way. I'll meet you all at the campsite and pay for Emma's stay directly. She's not missing this trip. Relieved, I turned back to Emma and Mrs. Anderson. Emma will be joining you at the campsite, I said, loud enough for Olivia to hear. Her father will meet you there to sort out any payment issues. True to his word, Michael met the school group at the campsite and paid for Emma's stay. Our daughter ended up having a wonderful time, making new friends and enjoying the outdoor activities. But Michael and I weren't about to let Olivia's actions slide. As soon as Emma returned home, we went to the police station. The investigation was swift. It turned out that Olivia had indeed received our payment but had deliberately omitted Emma from the list of paid participants. She was forced to return the money and faced potential legal consequences for her actions. The rift in our family seemed irreparable now, but at least we were taking a stand. Just when we thought the drama had settled, my phone rang. It was my father-in-law, his voice tight with concern. Hannah, I've heard some disturbing things about the school trip incident. Can you and Michael come over? We need to talk. When we arrived, Robert ushered us into his study, his face grave. Tell me everything, he said. We recounted the entire story, from Olivia's manipulation of the trip payments to our visit to the police station. Robert listened intently, his expression darkening with each detail. To our surprise, Robert picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Marco? It's Robert, Olivia's father. I need to know the truth about your divorce." Michael and I sat in stunned silence as Robert put the phone on speaker. Marco's accented voice filled the room. "Mr. Johnson, I've been waiting for this call," Marco said, sounding weary. "The truth is, Olivia was not the victim she claimed to be. She had constant tantrums, was pathologically jealous, and spent money like water. But the final straw was when I caught her with another man. I had no choice but to end our marriage." Robert's face paled. "But what about child support? Olivia said you refused to pay." Marco's laugh was bitter. "Refused? I pay a substantial amount every month. I'm shocked to hear you've been covering expenses. I assumed that money was going towards Luca's care." At that moment, Helen burst into the room, her face contorted with rage. She snatched the phone from Robert's hand. "How dare you spread such lies about my daughter?" she shrieked into the phone. "You're obligated to support her and Luca, do you hear me? Every penny." Robert wrestled the phone back, ending the call. The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by Helen's heavy breathing. "Helen," Robert said, his voice dangerously calm. "Get Olivia in here. Now." Minutes later, Olivia flounced into the room, designer shopping bags in hand. Her smug expression faltered as she took in the serious faces around her. "Olivia," Robert began, "we know everything. The lies about Marco, the money, the cheating. It stops now. You're going to get a job, starting tomorrow. No more handouts, no more luxury shopping trips." Olivia's shock quickly turned to anger. "You can't do this to me," she screeched. "Mom, tell him." Helen immediately jumped to Olivia's defense. "Robert, you're being ridiculous. Our daughter needs our support." Robert stood up, his patience finally snapped. "Enough," he roared. "This is my house, and I've had it with both of you. You're both leaving, now. And Helen, consider this the end of our marriage. I want a divorce." The room erupted into chaos. Olivia and Helen screamed and pleaded, but Robert stood firm. Michael and I sat in shocked silence, watching as years of manipulation and lies finally came crashing down. In the months following the dramatic confrontation at Robert's house, our lives underwent significant changes. Robert, true to his word, filed for divorce from Helen. Despite her manipulative behavior, he provided her with a fair compensation package, hoping it would give her a fresh start. However, we soon learned that Helen had handed over most of the money to Olivia, who quickly squandered it on luxury items and frivolous expenses. It wasn't long before they both found themselves in dire financial straits. Marco, having learned the truth about Olivia's deception, fought for full custody of his son. The court proceedings were intense, with Marco presenting evidence of Olivia's unstable lifestyle, her unemployment, and her lack of permanent residence. To our amazement, the American courts ruled in Marco's favor. Luca was to be returned to Italy to live with his father. It was a bittersweet moment. While we were relieved that Luca would be raised in a more stable environment, our hearts ached for the little boy who had to leave behind the only home he'd known. Weeks passed, and life began to settle into a new normal. Emma was thriving in school, and Michael and I were enjoying the peace that came with having distance from Helen and Olivia. Robert became a frequent visitor, clearly relishing his role as a doting grandfather to Emma. Then, one rainy afternoon, there was a knock at our door. I opened it to find Helen standing there, looking older and more haggard than I'd ever seen her. "Hannah," she began, her voice trembling, "I need to talk to you." Warily, I let her in. She sat on our couch, wringing her hands nervously. "I've made so many mistakes," Helen said, her eyes brimming with tears. "I realize now how terribly I've treated you and Emma. I miss my granddaughter so much. Please, I want to make amends. I want to help raise Emma, to be a proper grandmother to her. I was hoping, maybe I could come live with you and Michael?" I listened to her plea, feeling a mix of emotions, pity, anger, and a deep-seated weariness. But as I looked at her hopeful face, I knew what I had to do. "No, Helen," I said firmly. "After everything you've done, I can't allow you back into our lives, especially not Emma's. You've shown time and time again that you can't be trusted. I won't risk my daughter's well-being or happiness." Tears streaming down her face, Helen stumbled to the door. As she left, Michael arrived home. He took in the scene with a questioning look. I explained what had happened, and Michael pulled me into a tight embrace. "You did the right thing," he assured me. "We have to put Emma first." In the weeks that followed, we learned that Helen had found a small apartment and taken a job as a sales clerk in a local store. It was a far cry from her previous lifestyle, but it was an honest living. Robert became a constant presence in our lives, making up for lost time with Emma and forming a beautiful grandfather-granddaughter relationship. The pain of the past few years began to fade, replaced by the joy of our tight-knit family.